Hello guys, today as a continuation of the anterior abdominal wall to the previous class, we will deal with the skin and fascia of the anterior abdominal wall. As we dealt with the boundaries of the anterior abdominal wall in the previous class, we'll go in detail about the skin and fascia of the anterior abdominal wall, right? Okay. So there are layers in the anterior abdominal wall. The anterior abdominal wall is firm and elastic, right? And is in 8 layers, right? Skin, superficial fascia, and 3 muscles, fascia transversalis, extraperitoneal tissue, and parietal layer of peritoneum. So there are 8 layers in the anterior abdominal wall. We will deal in detail of every layer, right? So this is the skin, right, over here, and then the superficial fascia, which is 2 layers, and then external oblique, internal oblique, and transverse abdominis and transversalis fascia, right? Extraperitoneal fat and parietal peritoneum, right? In total, there are 8 layers, right, in the anterior abdominal wall. As you can observe, there is no deep fascia in the abdomen, right? The deep fascia is absent in the anterior abdominal wall to allow the bulging or distension of the abdominal wall as after taking meals, during pregnancy, etc. It is also absent in penis, scrotum, and perineum. Okay, remember these points. Coming to the skin of the anterior abdominal wall is thinner and more sensitive than the skin of the posterior abdominal wall. So it is more sensitive, right? Anterior is more sensitive than posterior. The skin is non-specialized and variably hirsute depending on sex and race, right? Because the male have more hair on their abdominal skin than female. All post-pubertal individuals have some extension of the pubic hair. That means after puberty, okay, after attaining puberty. On the anti-abdominal wall skin, although this is commonly most pronounced in males and in whom hair may extend almost up to the umbilicus in a triangular pattern. So up to the umbilicus in a triangular pattern, right, from pubis. It is more pronounced in males. If at all it is present in female, pronouncedly, it is called as hirsutism, right? When the hair is present on face, on thighs, chest, and abdomen in female, it is called as unwanted hair or hirsutism. Okay, it is commonly is because of the hormonal disharmony, right? The subcutaneous fat of the abdominal wall is highly variable in thickness depending on the part, on gender, and adiposity. Right, coming to the skin, there are some creases in the skin, visible skin creases. We have already dealt some of them in the previous class, right? Are lines on the anterior abdominal wall. They are visible. Midline furrow or groove. We have already dealt with this in the previous class. Linea semilunaris, okay? Abdomen, this is rectus abdominis, right? This one is linea semilunaris, right? Remember that. And transverse furrows, these are the transverse furrows. The tendinous insertions in the rectus abdominis. The 2 or 3 transverse furrows may sometimes be crossing the rectus abdominis muscle and corresponds to the tendinous intersections of the muscle. Muscle has tendinous intersections. So these transverse furrows, right, present is called as transverse furrows. They are called as linea transversalis. So there is linea alba over here, linea transversalis, linea semilunaris, and line of Venus. It is a semilunar line with concavity facing upward, seen mostly in females on the anterior abdominal wall between the umbilicus and pubic symphysis. Right? That is called as line of Venus. As female, Greek goddess of beauty is Venus. Right? There are famous sculpts of Venus without limbs. Right? So in the female, the area of pubic region is called as mound of Venus. Coming to the linea gravidorum. In the multiparous women, that means who bore more than one children. The lower part of the anterior abdominal wall presents a number of irregularly branched white lines called striae gravidorum. Right? They occur due to degenerative fibrosis of the subcutaneous fat because of undue stretching of the anterior abdominal wall by the gravid uterus. That means gravid means pregnant uterus. Because of the bulging, these fat undergoes degenerate fibrosis and presents as a white lines. You see, these are the linea gravidorum, right? And this is line of Venus. You see, this concavity upwards is line of Venus, which is present in females, right? You see, this is linea semilunaris, right? And this is linea transversalis, right? That corresponds with the tendinous intersections of the rectus abdominis muscle, right? That is the skin creases of in the anterior abdominal wall skin creases, right? Coming to the clavage lines of skin anterior abdominal wall. They are also called as Langer's lines because of the scientist who anatomist who described them. The cleavage lines or Langer's line in the anterior abdominal wall run horizontally. Okay, right? These are nothing but the how the collagenous fibers in the dermis, right, or the skin runs, whether they are horizontal or vertical or spiral, right? So depending on that, the entire skin, the collagen fibers in the entire skin dermis are topographed on the entire human being, okay, by the Langer, right? Anatomist Langer. So therefore, the abdominal incisions. So in the abdomen, the Langer lines are runs horizontally. Remember that, okay? The lines are in the horizontal. So abdominal incisions preferably should be given horizontally. So if you want to operate on abdomen, give an incision as in the horizontal direction. If you give incision in the vertical direction, so that the wound heal with invisible linear scars, right? If you give a horizontal incision, the wound will heal invisibly, okay, along with collagen fibers. If you give a vertical incision, the wound will not heal in the same fashion. You see, these are the Langer's lines, collagen fibers in the dermis. You see, vertical incision across Langer lines, wide scar upon healing. Whereas the horizontal incision parallel to Langer's line, linear scar upon healing. So there is, this will not be visible. right? Coming to the another important area in the that presents in the skin, and in the skin, this is the most important thing, right? In the anterior abdominal wall skin, that is umbilicus. Umbilicus is the most obvious feature of the anterior abdominal wall, right? It is in fact a normal puckered scar. Always remember, umbilicus is a scar, okay? Physiological scar in the anterior abdominal wall representing the site of attachment of the umbilical cord in the fetus, right? The position, you have to know this. The position of the umbilicus is variable in adults. It lies at the level of intervertebral disc L3 and L4, right? This is L3, this is L4, this is intervertebral disc, right? And between L3 and L4, which is a transumbilical plane. Okay, remember the last class? Transumbilical plane. In the newborn, it's slightly at a lower level due to poorly developed pelvic region, and in the old days, right, it comes down to the lower level due to diminished tone of the abdominal muscle. So the tonicity of the abdominal muscles got decreased. Because of that, there will be pendulous abdomen. Pendulous abdomen, which results in lowered level of umbilicus. The level of umbilicus serves as watershed line for venous and lymphatic drainage. So the anatomical significance. The venous blood and lymph flow upward above the level of the umbilicus. Remember that the venous blood and the lymph flow upward above the umbilicus and downward below the level of the umbilicus. It is indicated at the level of T10 dermatome. Okay, we have already discussed that. T10 dermatome. That is, skin around the umbilicus is supplied by the 10th spinal segment, right? It is one of the important sites for portocaval anastomosis. Coming to the embryological significance, it is the meeting point of 4 folds of embryonic plates: 2 lateral folds, head fold, and tail fold, right? It is all these 4 folds meets at the umbilicus. In embryonic life, a defect exists in the linea alba at this site called umbilical ring. Okay, in the linea alba, there is a defect called umbilical ring which provides passage to the following structures. Right, this umbilical ring provides the midgut loop. Okay, during development, the midgut herniates in the umbilical cord. Right, during the 5th to 10th weeks of intrauterine life, but returns back to the abdominal cavity during 10th to 12th week of intrauterine life. So 6th to 10th, 5th to 10th, and 10th to 12th week, right? The two endodermal tubes, allantois and vitellointestinal duct, projects into the umbilical cord. The allantois is the diverticulum of the endodermal cloaca. Its proximal part gives rise to the urinary bladder and distal part of the ureus. So vitellointestinal duct is a diverticulum of the midgut extending from the distal part of the ileum to the umbilicus. Sometimes its proximal part persists as Meckel's diverticulum. Umbilical vessels, 2 arteries and 1 vein, right? Arteries 2, vein 1, pass to and fro between umbilical cord and placenta. The remnants of the umbilical arteries are present in the adult as medial umbilical ligament and remnant of the umbilical vein as ligamentum teres. So remember that umbilical arteries became remnant in the adult and called as medial umbilical ligament, whereas the vein is called as ligamentum teres. Thus, there are four important embryological remnants of the umbilicus: ligamentum teres, two medial umbilical ligaments, umbilical arteries, and median umbilical ligament. Okay, difference between this and this is LN is called as urachus. Okay, this is a remnant of urachus. Although the umbilicus is a scar in the anterior abdominal wall, it is of immense cosmetic value, particularly in the females, right? Therefore, the surgical incision should never be given across it. Okay. The skin around the umbilicus is supplied by T10 spinal segment. Therefore, visceral pain of appendicitis is referred to the umbilicus. Note the appendix is supplied by T10 spinal segment. So, because both the appendix and skin around the umbilicus are supplied by the same spinal segment, if the appendix is inflamed, that pain will be referred to the skin around the umbilicus, right? That is called as referred pain. Right? Fecal fistula, urinary fistula, and exomphalus. We'll deal with it. You see, this is the uterus, right? Intrauterine life. This is the fetus. This is the placenta, that is the nurturer. Okay, nurturer from the mother side, and the umbilical cord is the connection between the mother, placenta, and the fetus, right? So the umbilicus is the fatal end of umbilical cord, right? Is the fatal end of umbilical cord. Okay, remember that. We'll tell more. So let me tell you something. So everything is transferred between all the nutrients, right? Nutrients and the excretory things, right, are passed, go out through this umbilical cord and comes into this umbilical cord through this umbilical cord, right? So that is why umbilical cord and umbilicus is very important structure, right? So there are two arteries, right, and one vein are present in the umbilical cord, right? But we will not show that here. What I want to show is the embryological gut. Okay, right? Foregut, midgut, and hindgut. Okay, the hindgut opens into the umbilicus, right? It connects to the umbilicus, right? So vascular system, that is two arteries and one vein. Second, GIT, gastrointestinal tract, that is midgut, right? And third one is excretory, that is here there will be bladder, and again it is connected to the umbilicus and it is called as urachus, right, or urachus. So there are vascular structures, vascular bundle, two arteries and one vein, which helps in exchange of blood and blood gases, right? And to the midgut, okay, midgut is open into the umbilicus, right, through vitello-intestinal duct. Okay, vitello-intestinal duct. It is the connection is called as vitello-intestinal duct, right? And the connection of the bladder is called as urachus, right? So in the adult, okay, they present only in the intrauterine life. In the adult, they should be obliterated. Okay, both this vital intestinal duct and these arteries and vein and these urachus should be obliterated, right? They are obliterated. They must obliterate. If they are present also in the adult, it is called as patent, okay, or persistent, like persistent vital intestinal duct or patent vital intestinal duct, patent urachus or persistent urachus, it is called as like that. So if the vital intestinal duct is persistent in the adult life means after the intrauterine life it continues, okay, it is not obliterated. So what happens, the fecal matter comes through the umbilicus, right? This is called as fecal fistula. Okay, if the same thing happens through the urachus, right, urachus, which leaks out urine, it is called as urinary fistula, right? Okay, and most important thing is this vitello-intestinal duct, right? This is proximal part and distal part and mid part, right? If the proximal part is persistent, it is called as Meckel's diverticulum, right? Meckel's diverticulum. Okay, it is the, if the Meckel's diverticulum is inflamed in the adult, okay, in many adults the Meckel's diverticulum is present. If it is inflamed, it is called as diverticulitis, right? Meckel's diverticulum. And if the distal part is open, right, persistent, and there is intestinal loop, we have already discussed that during the 5th to 10th week there is herniation of intestinal loop, which again goes into the abdominal cavity. Okay, if there is the failure of this loop, it is called as omphalocele or exomphalocele, exomphalus, right? Okay, so you see umbilical arteries and umbilical vein. Vein carries the oxygenated blood, arteries carries the deoxygenated blood. So you see these are the structures that present within the umbilicus. You see this is the bladder and it is connected by urachus, right, and arteries and vein, and this is the midgut, right? You see Meckel's diverticulum, this proximal part is Meckel's diverticulum, we have already said that. And this is during the development, you see amniotic cavity and yolk sac, okay, the midgut develops from this. You see this is the head fold and tail fold and the lateral folds. So there are four folds, right? Umbilicus is the head fold, tail fold and four folds, lateral folds. You see this is the yolk sac, this is primitive gut, which is connected by vitello-intestinal duct. You see this is vitello-intestinal duct. Okay, this is the primitive gut from which the midgut, hindgut, foregut, right? So that is the connection. And you see, this is the fetus, right? Early weeks, months. You see, this is the umbilical cord, umbilical ring. Okay. You see, vital line duct, vital intestinal duct, right? This is allantois. That means ureters, right? You see, this is the bladder. This is the umbilicus. You see, ureters. The bladder is connected to the umbilicus, right? Through ureters. Okay, because it is present in the adult. Okay, after intrauterine life, it is called as ureters fistula. You see, if the distal part of the ureters is persistent, it is called as urachal sinus. If the entire tract is persistent, it is urachal fistula. If only mid part of the ureters is persistent, it is called as urachal cyst. Right? This is how umbilicus has obliterated ureters, median umbilical ligament, two medial umbilical ligaments, and there is umbilical vein. This is vital intestinal duct and umbilical vein. You see the diverticulum. So let us read now. Failure of the vital intestinal duct to obliterate results in fecal fistula at the umbilicus. Right? The fecal matter coming out of the umbilicus. And the failure of the urachus to obliterate leads to urinary fistula at the umbilicus. Examples are omphalocele, failure of the midgut loop to return into the abdominal cavity results in the exomphalus. Since the intestines protrude through a defect in all layers of the abdominal wall at the umbilical ring, a thin transparent membrane, the amnion, covers it. Okay, right? So these are the anatomical significance of the umbilicus and congenital anomalies of the umbilicus. Okay, most of the surgical cases are exomphalocele. This is the most important thing, or omphalocele. You see, this is umbilicus, right? This is umbilicus, and there is median umbilical fold, medial umbilical fold, lateral umbilical fold, right? Again, this one, lateral umbilical fold, medial umbilical fold, right? Okay, observe those diagrams after the class. You'll understand it in a more clear-cut way. Okay, with that we end the skin of the anterior abdominal wall. Okay. Next, deep to the skin is the superficial fascia. Right, the superficial fascia contains a variable amount of fat, maximum in lower half of the anterior abdominal wall. The anterior abdominal wall is the major site of the fat accumulation, especially in the females, leading to obesity. Above the level of the line joining the two anterior superior iliac spines, the superficial fascia consists of a single layer. That means, in one textbook, it is given as above the line joining the anterior superior iliac spines. But in some other textbooks, it is given as the lower region of the anterior part of the abdomen below the umbilicus. Okay, so those are the structures. That means below the umbilicus, there are two layers of superficial fascia. Above the umbilicus, the abdominal fascia is only one layer. Okay, and the two layers are, that means superficial fascia of the abdomen. Okay, which is more pronounced in the lower abdomen. That means below the umbilicus, right? Superficial fatty layer and a deep membranous layer. The fatty layer is called as campus fascia, and the deep membranous layer called as carpus fascia. right? The space between these two layers contains superficial epigastric, circumflex celiac, and external pudendal vessels and superficial inguinal lymph nodes. Okay, so the superficial epigastric, circumflex, and external pudendal vessels. Okay, veins which drains into the superficial inguinal, right? You remember the dissection, right? So all these vascular structures are present in the superficial fascia, right? You see superficial fascia and another layer scarpa's fascia. Coming to the superficial fatty layer, adipose layer, campus fascia. The superficial layer contains a variable amount of fat that is partitioned by fibrous septa connecting the dermis with the deeper membranous layer. Inferiorly, it is continuous with the superficial fascia of the thigh. Remember that. So the campus fascia is continuous with the superficial fascia of the thigh, and medially it is continuous over the linea alba, right? From both sides, it is continuous as linea alba, and below it is continued as the superficial fascia of the thigh, right? In men, the superficial layer continues over the penis after losing its fat and fusing with the deeper layer of superficial fascia, that is membranous layer, scarpa's fascia. Okay, it loses its fat. Okay, it is devoid of the fat and fuses with the scarpa's fascia, continues into the scrotum where it forms a specialized fascial layer containing smooth muscle fibers, the dartos fascia. So the dartos muscle is covered by dartos fascia, which is a continuation of the campus fascia, that is superficial fatty layer of the anterior abdominal wall, which when enters the penis devoid of the fatty tissue and fused with the deeper membranous layer or scarpa's fascia of the anterior abdominal wall. Okay, continues into the scrotum and formed a fascia around the dartos muscle is called as dartos fascia. Right, in the female, it continues from the suprapubic region, retains some fat and is component of the labia majora. Okay, remember that. So in the male, it is continuous as the fascia of the penis and fascia of the scrotum, that is dartos fascia, and in the male and the female, it is continuous as a component of the labia majora. Coming to the deep membranous layer called as Scarpa's fascia. The deep membranous layer of superficial fascia of the abdomen is made up of elastic type of fibrous tissue. In the midline, it is attached to the linea alba. On each side, it is separated from the underlying external oblique muscle by a layer of loose areolar tissue which disappears superiorly and toward the median plane. So it is separated from the deeper muscle by an loose areolar tissue. And below, it crosses the inguinal ligament, right, and gets attached to the fascia lata. That means deep fascia of the thigh, right? Remember fascia lata. So the campus fascia or the superficial fatty layer is continuous below the inguinal ligament as superficial layer of the thigh, whereas the superficial fascia, deep membranous layer of the Scarpa's fascia is continuous with the fascia lata of the thigh immediately below and parallel to the ligament. Okay, it continues as the fascia lata. It continues into the anterior part of the perineum, right, where it is firmly attached to the ischiopubic rami, right, in the perineum attached to the ischiopubic rami and to the posterior margin of the perineal membrane. Okay, here it is referred to as the superficial perineal fascia or Colles fascia. So the Colles fascia, so the deep membranous layer or Scarpa's fascia is continuous with the fascia lata in the inguinal ligament and in the perineum attached to the ischiopubic rami and the perineal membrane and is called as superficial perineal fascia or Colles fascia. The Colles fascia stretches across the margins of the pubic arch and is attached to the posterior edge of the urogenital diaphragm, posterior border of the perineal membrane, which also stretches across the pubic arch, right? So you'll understand more when we dealt with pelvis, right? Perineal membrane, urogenital diaphragm, all these are some new to you, but it will be clear. But in the intro section and in the sacrum and coccyx, we have already dealt with them, right? So the space between the perineal membrane and Colles fascia is known as superficial perineal pouch, right? So the space between Colles fascia and perineal membrane is called superficial perineal pouch. In boys, the testes can frequently be retracted out of scrotum into the loose alveolar tissue between the membranous layer of the superficial fascia over the inguinal canal and the external oblique aponeurosis. The space is sometimes called as superficial inguinal pouch. So here we encountered superficial perineal pouch and superficial inguinal pouch. Okay, so this is superficial inguinal pouch. This is scrotum, right? This is penis. Okay, so in while from the posterior abdominal wall to the scrotum, okay, the descent of testis, sometimes the testis may stop at this region. Okay, this is the most common region where testis stops the descent. Okay, it is called as cryptorchidism. Okay, so the site is superficial inguinal pouch, okay, between external oblique aponeurosis and superficial deep membranous layer of superficial fascia of the anterior abdominal wall or Scarpa's fascia. So the between external oblique aponeurosis and Scarpa's fascia, this space is called as superficial inguinal pouch. In men, the deeper membranous layer of the superficial fascia blends with the superficial layer as both pass over the penis, forming the superficial fascia of the penis, Buck's fascia. So penile fascia is called as Buck's fascia, which is formed by the fusion of Capra's fascia and Scarpa's fascia, right? Before they continue into the scrotum, where they form the Dartos fascia, okay? Also in men, extensions of the deeper membranous layer of the superficial fascia attached to the pubic symphysis pass inferiorly onto the dorsum and sides of the penis to form the fundiform ligament of penis, right? So these are the suspensory ligament. Penis has a suspensory ligament system. Okay, one of the suspensory ligament is fundiform ligament. In women, the membranous layer of the superficial fascia continues into the labia majora and the anterior part of the perineum. So the membranous layer forms the Buck's fascia, Dartos fascia, fundiform ligament, and labia majora and perineum. The line of attachment of Scarpa's fascia with the fascia lata, remember this, is marked on the surface by Holden's line, which begins a little lateral to the pubic tubercle and extends laterally for about 8 centimeters, right? From pubic tubercle to up to 8 centimeters. Okay, fascia lata and fascia scarpa. A potential space exists in the anterior abdominal wall between Scarpa's fascia and aponeurosis of the external oblique. It is termed as superficial inguinal space. We have already dealt with this. So you see, this is the Scarpa's fascia, okay, blue covering. It is continuous as the continue with the superficial penile fascia, right? And here ischiopubic ramus, attachment to the ischiopubic rami, and continues as the Dartos fascia, right? Superficial perineal fascia or Colles fascia. Here superficial fascia, and here this is the Holden's line, attachment of the fascia lata. So This is how the Scarpa's fascia is continuous. You see, this is the superficial fascia, fatty layer, Camper's fascia. Okay, this is the membranous layer, Scarpa's fascia. Okay, this is penis. You see, Scarpa's fascia is continued and Camper's fascia is continued. Okay, and in the scrotum, the same Scarpa's fascia forming Dartos fascia, right? You see, this is the Holden's line, 8 centimeters laterally from the pubic tubercle, right? This is Scarpa's fascia. You see, the Scarpa's fascia has the Buck's fascia and Dartos fascia and Colles fascia, that is superficial perineal fascia, right? So this space is called a superficial perineal pouch, right? Superficial perineal pouch, right? So Buck's fascia, Dartos fascia, Colles fascia, all are extensions of superficial fascia of abdomen. You see, Scarpa's fascia bears two important clinical correlations, right? It serves as a film unit for suturing the superficial fascia during the closure of the anterior abdominal wall or perineum after abdominal or pelvic surgery. So, it is the film unit for suturing. Second, the attachment of Scarpa's and Colles fascia are such that they prevent the passage of extravasate urine, right? Remember that due to urethral rupture, backward into the sacrorectal fossa and downward into the thighs. If there is no formation, you see, this is the superficial perineal pouch is there, right? So if the urethra is injured, the urine will be collected here only, okay? If there is no pouch here, the urine will be in the sacrorectal fossa and in the thigh, which will infect all the other areas. The line of fusion of Scarpa's fascia passes over the Holden's line, body of pubis, margins of the pubic arch, and posterior border of the perineal membrane or posterior edge of the urogenital diaphragm. Therefore, if male urethra is ruptured in the perineum, the extravasated urine collects first in the superficial pouch of perineum and then on the anterior abdominal wall, inferior to the umbilicus in the superficial inguinal space. So, superficial perineal pouch and superficial inguinal pouch, right? The urine is collected here. The presence of urine in these confined spaces where Scarpa's fascia is attached makes the clinician to suspect urethral rupture due to trauma. If there is an accident, there is pelvic injury, that means there is urethral injury, right? So the rupture of urethra, traumatic rupture of urethra can be present as swollen perineum, swollen scrotum, swollen penis, swollen lower part of the abdominal wall. So you see, so if the urethra is ruptured here, okay, urine will be collected here in the superficial perineal pouch or here in the superficial inguinal space, right? Or it can as a swollen penis, right? In the penis, right? Or in the scrotum, right? So that is the attachment of, let me show you something. So that is Buck's fascia, right? And fascia of the penis, right? and you see that is selected structure is Buck's fascia, whereas this is Darto's fascia, right? See, so that is the fascia, right? Selected structure is the Darto's fascia, right? The whole selected structure is Darto's fascia. You remove that. So that is Buck's fascia, right? Penile fascia, and along with the scrotum, it is called as Darto's fascia. Okay. Okay. So with that, we and the skin and fascia of the anterior abdominal wall, right? Let me know if you have any doubts, right?